Bastard, believer of witchcraft, worshipper at the shrine of Satanism, my prediction is that you will slowly rot during a long and painful illness which you have brought upon yourself. The words were written by a moviegoer in 1968. The bastard was William Castle, producer of the film Rosemary's Baby, a film about the birth of Satan's child. The film, based on a 1967 book of the same name by Ira Levin, was a blockbuster. It earned some $30 million at the box office and captured one Academy Award and was nominated for another. It earned a Golden Globe Award and a Photoplay Award and garnered Castle a nomination for Producer of the Year from the Producers Guild. And although the film earned Castle his first major critically acclaimed success and put him on the verge of a brilliant career as a producer of mainstream A pictures, the film also set forth what Castle believed was a curse that nearly cost him his life and took the lives of numerous others.
We have civilian labor here. Here? You're all right, baby. You're going to be perfectly all right.
William Castle's claim to fame came in the 1950s as the director and producer of B horror films that were marketed with gimmicks and off-the-wall promotions. His career in the movie business started in 1929 when at the age of 15 he had the opportunity to be Bela Lugosi's assistant stage manager in the stage production of Dracula. It was here that Castle got his first taste of behind-the-scenes horror and the promotion of it. After years of directing, producing, and acting in lesser-known plays and movies, Castle found his niche, creating campy horror. Films like The Tingler, 13 Ghosts, House on Haunted Hill, Straitjacket, and I Saw What You Did used gimmicks like life insurance policies against death by fright, electrically charged seats to scare moviegoers, and fright breaks to rake in the box office receipts from teenagers looking for a good scare. But many of his films were panned by critics and have gone down in history as schlock horror. In 1967, Castle received galley proofs of Rosemary's Baby from literary agent Marvin Bird, and according to his 1976 autobiography, Castle had no intention of even reading the book, let alone making the movie. "You know the bottom's falling out of horror films," Castle told Bird. "They'll knock you on your ass," replied Bird of the proofs. Castle agreed to read the proofs at home that evening and finished them in 3 hours, knowing he had to make the movie. The asking price to purchase the rights to the book was $250,000, and Castle didn't have that kind of money. He wanted to think about it, but was told he'd better act fast because someone else was interested in it. The other person was rumored to be Alfred Hitchcock. Now Castle had been watching Hitchcock for years. To create first-rate thrillers and horrors was his dream, and Hitchcock was the master. Drawing big-name talent to his films like Hitchcock did was another one of his goals. In the 60s, Castle succeeded in getting Joan Crawford and Barbara Stanwyck to star in his films, and he'd worked with Vincent Price on several occasions. But his films never came close to Hitchcock's with the critics. In 1961, he even made his own Psycho called Homicidal, in which a knife-wielding woman dressed as a man goes psycho. But the film never quite lived up to a Hitchcock thriller. Castle knew Rosemary's Baby was his chance to shine. Hitchcock supposedly turned the film rights down, but Castle, on the other hand, offered $100,000 in cash and 5% of 100% of the profits. And if the book became a bestseller, Castle promised an additional $50,000. 24 hours later, his deal was accepted. Castle had planned to direct the movie, but Paramount Studios, who negotiated to film the horror, had another idea. They offered him $250,000 and 50% of the profits to produce the film, but for direction, Paramount had someone else in mind. "Have you ever heard of Roman Polanski?" asked Charles Bluedorn, one of the top executives of Paramount. "Of course," answered Castle, who knew of Polanski's flair for filmmaking and his early classics like Knife in the Water. "If Polanski, with his youth, directed Rosemary's Baby, and you, with your experience, produced it, you could teach each other so much," said Bluedorn. "No deal," said Castle. But in time, Castle agreed to meet Polanski and found his ideas about the film suitable to his own. Castle bowed to Paramount, and Polanski would direct the film. Polanski then adapted the screenplay and set forth to film the movie. His salary was only $150,000 with no net of the proceeds. When it came to casting the role of Rosemary, Castle won out. Polanski wanted Tuesday Weld for the lead role, while Castle saw Mia Farrow. Robert Redford was chosen as the role of Rosemary's husband, but because of legal troubles with Paramount, he was dropped from consideration. Jack Nicholson was reportedly interested in the role, but John Cassavetes eventually was chosen for the part. And for the neighbors, Minnie and Roman Castevet, Ruth Gordon and Cindy Blackmer were chosen. Once the rest of the cast was rounded out, production began. Troubles on the set began almost immediately after production began in the fall of 1967, according to Castle. Polanski was known as a perfectionist, claimed Castle, and in his first 6 hours of shooting, not a single shot was captured. I was amazed at Roman's eye for detail, said Castle in his autobiography. A perfectionist, he refused to compromise. If I had been directing the picture, I could have finished the scene in several hours. Polanski was taking several nights. In another slow process, Polanski set the story in 1965 and insisted that every furnishing and item of clothing matched the year. And while it was only 2 years earlier, the process became cumbersome. The crew fell behind, days behind schedule, and Castle feared Paramount might shut down the production. He urged Polanski to speed up the process, but Polanski refused to bend. Rosemary will be a blockbuster, but I will not compromise. You understand, don't you? Said Polanski. The first fatality of the production came in the form of a marriage. Mia Farrow had recently married Frank Sinatra, and Sinatra had planned to star with his wife in his next film. But because Rosemary's Baby was behind schedule, Farrow would never be finished before the next production began. Mia's supposed to start my picture on Monday. Will she be finished by then? Asked Sinatra on the phone to Castle, who was amazed to be talking to Sinatra, but knew he didn't have an answer that would please him. No, Frank, I'm afraid that's impossible. Even by working Saturdays, she'll be at least 3 weeks, replied Castle. Then I'm pulling her off your picture tomorrow, said Sinatra. That'll mean shutting us down, Frank. Sorry to do that to you, Bill, but there's no other choice. But there was another choice, and it was Mia Farrow's. She decided she wanted to finish the picture, and her marriage felt a blow. Rumors said Sinatra threatened to divorce her if she didn't walk off the picture, and when she didn't, the story goes that Sinatra sent his lawyers to Polanski's offices during the filmmaking to deliver her the divorce papers. The marriage didn't last the year. Another problem on the set was the clash of personalities between Polanski and Cassavetes. Shouting matches between the director and his leading male star were said to be commonplace during filming, and their dislike for each other only grew as production dragged on. And the fact that Cassavetes was a director made the conflict worse as each insulted the other's style of work. Eventually the production did come to an end, and the film was cut, and everyone was sure they had a winner on their hands. And they were right. The film proved to be the success Paramount was looking for after its release in June 1968. Total cost of the production was a mere $2.3 million. The film, in its original release, took in more than $15 million in box office receipts, becoming the 34th largest money-making film of the decade and one of Paramount's top 5 moneymakers of the 60s, eventually grossing more than $30 million. Critics were mixed about the film. Some felt Polanski pulled off a fantastic effort, while others were less ecstatic. Reviewer for the New York Times, Vincent Canby, wrote, Mia Farrow is quite marvelous, pale, suffering, and almost constantly on screen in a difficult role that requires her to be learning for almost 2 hours what the audience has guessed from the start. For most of its length, the film has nothing to be excited about, nothing cumulative to fill that time with suspense. But the good side of that is that you can see the movie and like it without risking terrors or nightmares. As the box office receipts flowed in, so did the mail. Castle claimed in his autobiography that he'd received an average of 50 hate letters a day after the film's initial release. I've received crank letters on my other pictures, he wrote, but none like these. The letters called him a Satan worshiper, a purveyor of evil, and his soul would forever burn in hell. He tossed them off knowing it was one of the costs of success, and he looked to his bright future knowing the hit picture would be leading to profits and an opportunity to have his pick of projects. But in addition to the nasty letters, a number of religious groups publicly blasted the film, urging the public to boycott the feature. But the publicity only added to the appeal, drawing moviegoers to see what all the commotion was about. Some even say that Castle had his hands in the protests, hiring people to picket the film to create more publicity. Castle's next offer came in the form of a dark comedy. Neil Simon's The Out-of-Towners offered Castle a chance to move on. It would be a major departure for Castle, and another mainstream critical success could put him on the map of major motion pictures. The producer's job was offered to him and he wanted it. But no sooner had he agreed to go to New York and settle the deal than he felt a pain in his groin. He thought it was just indigestion and he'd be in New York by Monday, but it was not to be. The pain grew worse. Nausea followed and the room began to spin. He blacked out. It was Halloween and they found him unconscious on the floor of his home when his wife and children returned from trick-or-treating. At the hospital they found there was a blockage. He drank lots of fluids but he could not urinate. He couldn't feel his legs. In surgery they gave him a spinal and the blockage finally began to free itself. After 6 days he was able to go home. Then it happened again. Back in the hospital, more surgery. It was kidney stones the size of small rocks. He was home again in 2 weeks. Then it happened again. Then again. More time in the hospital and more surgery. He began to believe the letters of hate and the curse from Rosemary's Baby. He feared it was going to kill him, he said. The story of Rosemary's Baby was happening in life. Witches, all of them were casting their spell, and I was becoming one of their principal players, he wrote. While Castle was battling his own evils in the hospital, fate struck again. Christopher Comita, the composer of Rosemary's Baby, had a blood clot suddenly rupture in his brain while skiing. Comita was a longtime friend of Polanski's who had scored many of his films. He was admitted to the same hospital as Castle. He was in a coma. A short time later, after he had been awarded a Golden Globe Award as composer of the film, Comita died. Castle no longer could stand on his own. He began seeing the breast urologist he could find, searching for a cure. There was a stone causing the main obstruction. Castle could no longer handle the surgery and feared he was going to die. The only alternative was sodium bicarbonate injections. They were painful, but they might dissolve the stone. Castle decided it was better than surgery and took the injections. They were given twice a day, every day, and caused him to suffer high fevers. Weeks turned into months, and it looked like surgery would have to follow. But finally the stone began to dissolve. Castle began to get well. He thought the curse had lifted. But back when Roman Polanski agreed to direct Rosemary's Baby, he needed a place to live in California after the filming was finished in New York, and at least for the duration of the picture. Castle claims he agreed to help him find a home before filming began. Polanski wanted a place near the ocean. Polanski's fiancée, Sharon Tate, would be the one to decide on the place. Castle had found a home in Malibu, but later, deciding they wanted a larger home, Polanski and Tate moved to a place hidden at the end of a lonely winding road, Bel Air Hill in Benedict Canyon. The Redwood House at 10,050 Cielo Drive had a large lawn, a swimming pool, and a guest house. The owner was a Hollywood business manager who had leased the home to the son of Doris Day, Terry Melcher, who was living there with his girlfriend, actress Candice Bergen. Melcher was moving and decided to sublet the house. Tate loved the place and it was settled. But Tate was not aware of Melcher's tie to a bizarre character named Charles Manson. It appears that Melcher, who was best known as a Hollywood record producer, was being pestered by Manson for a recording contract. Manson, who had lived with Beach Boy Dennis Wilson for a time and developed some of his musical contacts with him, considered himself a would-be musician and sent Melcher some recordings he had made. Melcher never took any interest in the tapes and ignored him. But Manson became bitter, even showing up at his home looking for the demo tapes he had sent. When Manson arrived at 10,050 Cielo Drive, Tate's personal photographer, Sharok Harami, answered the door but didn't recognize the name Melcher and turned Manson away. Tate appeared at the door as he was leaving and reportedly asked, "Who was that guy?" Manson supposedly turned back and looked at Tate and then left the scene. He had no idea Melcher had moved. Later that night, Manson reportedly told his followers, "You're going out on devil's business," and he sent them to 10,050 Cielo Drive, telling them no one must survive. Some stories suggest vengeance against Melcher had led to the crime. 4 of Manson's disciples, Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian, arrived at the house. Steve Parent, an 18-year-old friend of caretaker William Garrettson, was leaving the guest house at 12:18 a.m. when the killers arrived. He was shot and killed in his car, but no one heard the killing. Watson, Atkins, and Krenwinkel then entered the main house, with Kasabian keeping lookout outside. They confronted Wojtek Frykowski, 37, a friend of Polanski's who was staying at the house with his girlfriend, Abigail Folger, 26, heir to the Folger coffee fortune. In addition to Frykowski and Folger, Jay Sebring, 35, Hollywood hairdresser and one-time boyfriend to Sharon Tate, was spending the evening to keep Tate company while Polanski was in London working on several screenplays. The 4 were herded into the living room and then stabbed and beaten to death. The word pig was scrawled on the white floor of the living room in Tate's blood. Tate, who had starred in Valley of the Dolls, was only 26 at the time and 8 months pregnant with Polanski's child. Manson was not not present during the killings, but later convicted of the murders along with the others. Manson and his followers continued their murder spree by killing Leno and Rosemary LaBianca in Los Feliz in another grisly murder scene, and ranch hand Donald Shea was also killed, but his body was not found until 8 years later. Gary Hinman, a friend of the Manson tribe, was also killed at his Topanga home weeks before the killing spree by another of Manson's followers. The murders looked like ritualistic killings. At first, the Tate and LaBianca killings were not linked. Polanski was questioned by the police for a time and was a suspect in the killings. There were stories of drugs and black magic, and the satanic story behind Rosemary's Baby fueled rumors for months about the killings. Castle saw the headlines while he was just beginning to recuperate from his own brush with death and saw it as another part of the curse. And as the acclaim of his latest film came, he no longer cared. Castle wrote, "Ironically, all my life I had yearned for the applause, approval, and recognition from my peers, and when the awards were being passed out, I no longer cared. I was at home, very frightened of Rosemary's Baby and still very ill." The murders had all of Hollywood cloaked in fear. Frank Sinatra was said to be in hiding, and Mia Farrow refused to attend Tate's funeral because it was reported that she was afraid she would be next. Many stars beefed up security and began carrying guns, and there were numerous offers of rewards for catching the killers. Castle himself physically recovered from Rosemary's Baby, but his career never did. Although he did continue to work for nearly a decade after the film, none of his films equaled the success of Rosemary's Baby, and while the out-of-towners might have given Castle newfound success and the acclaim he desired, what he called the curse of Rosemary's Baby cost him that as well. The film was made without him. On May 31, 1977, William Castle died of a heart attack. He believed until the day he died that there was a curse on Rosemary's Baby. Roman Polanski, on the other hand, has never supported that belief. But the tale of the curse doesn't end there. The film has several other bizarre coincidences. In the film, a character named Teresa commits suicide after learning that the Castevets are conspiring to have her impregnated by the devil. She jumps to her death, landing in the same spot where John Lennon was shot to death by Mark David Chapman in 1980. Chapman, some say, met a man named Kenneth Anger in the late 1970s in Hawaii, where Chapman gave Anger 2 silver bullets for luck. Anger was a small-time director who in the 1960s made a film called Lucifer Rising. The film starred Bobby Beausoleil, a friend of Anger's. Beausoleil was the one who reportedly, on the orders of Charles Manson, murdered Gary Hinman. Beausoleil was caught by the police shortly after the killing, but Manson supposedly plotted to get him out by staging copycat killings to lead the police to believe Hinman's real killer was still on the loose. The Manson family killings of Sharon Tate and friends and the LaBianca couple may have been carried out only to free Beausoleil, and the ironic ties between the movie and the murders may have simply been coincidence after all.
Rosemary, go back to bed. You know you're not supposed to be up and around.
Is the mother Rosemary?
Shut up.
Rosemary.
Shut up, you're in Dubrovnik. I don't hear you.